Hello and welcome to this video on Dynamics. Dynamics in two senses, the Dynamics module from Dannysound and Dynamics EQ compression and wider techniques for modular music making. Let's check out a bit of what's to come.
Everything going to be.
And it is with humility and hope that we take this step.
Now up front, I'd like to thank Fonk for sponsoring this video. So as you've just seen in those previews, there's lots of patch techniques and music making tips and tricks to come in this video. Dynamics, the module, can be used for lots of different things, so there's some listed out here in the video. So let's run down the controls for Dynamics and the VU meters. We have our input to the compressor. This goes up and we have an input gain. This is the input for the whole device before anything actually happens. We have compression on this top left control to the left with increasing compression, and to the right we have expansion with an increasing amount of expanding going on. We have the initial level control, which is part of the level control of the actual compression. We have attack and release for the internal envelope follower, and an envelope output from that followed audio. So your input will be envelope followed to control the compression, and you'll have that if you want to patch that around a system. We can override that with an envelope in, and then just use this like a standard VCA almost, but with lots of character and colour, and we'll explore that in this video. There's also a sidechain input, which will use the attack and release controls to shape it. Your expanded or compressed sound hits this mix control to blend back in some dry sound for parallel New York style compression if you wish. And we have a sub bass generator and bass boost with its own compression built in. The amp drive is part of this compressor, and it'll introduce some nice soft clipping from this discrete analog circuit. The output of the compressor or expander goes to the EQ input, so you can patch that and use these entirely separately, but it normalizes across and we have the EQ's output. Treble, middle and bass controls for the EQ, and the exciter, which has two different bandwidths, one for more high-end kind of sparkle and one for more mid-range kind of snap. You can chain two Dynamics modules into a VU meters module, where you can look at the input to these devices or an external in on this first switch. You can look at the output of the compression or the gain reduction, and we can set this to be off or a high or low sensitivity. And these will be backlit, as you'll see in the video once it's powered on. There's an image on screen of a signal path for the module, and you can check that out linked below for a higher quality image file. The timing index is on screen. Skip around in the description below, and there's some examples without any talking, some musical moments in the video. So without further ado, let's dive in. So here we'll treat dynamics like steroids for your oscillators. a real kind of thickener, saturator, shaper to come right after your oscillators. Have a ramp wave coming in, and we'll turn it into this. Deep, rich thickness. Now I'll just play around, that saw wave or ramp wave is coming in, and I'm just smashing it in Dynamics. And there's loads of steroid oscillatorness, if that's even a thing, but loads of processing and shaping to be had by putting oscillator waves in and thinking of this for something to go at the start of a patch rather than at the end. So rather than just shaping the oscillator, here it is shaping the end of a patch with a filter and a VCA. Now my dry sound is that same ramp wave we were shaping into a VCA and a filter with some envelopes controlling them. Through Dynamics for a load of drive. And there's some effects as well, but listen to all the shaping we can get. It's like there's loads of pressure there, it just squashes and fattens, shapes this oscillator and filter really nicely. So here we look at patching a ducking delay, or dynamic delay, and this has become quite a popular effect that you see in powerful digital effects pedals. It's simply a delay that ducks out of the way of the input signal, so sidechain compressing the effects is all we need to do that. Now my dry sound is this stereo sound from Rings. If I bypass Dynamics, that stereo sound's been blended to mono, and here it is through my effects chain. A nice characterful ambient delay. Now just bringing that back together, the bypassed wet signal and the dry, it's a bit washy and lacking definition from that input signal. It's going back to just the effect sound. I'm taking my dry sound into the sidechain inputs, coming in and out with my effects, and the envelope out here is simply so we can see that compression curve on data. Even with really extreme compression, mixing that against the dry, that's a lot of ducking, but between the notes we get these blooms of effects coming through. And when a dry note hits, it ducks out of the way, giving us that clarity and definition within a mix. So here we're going to look at shaping kick drums, generally fattening, saturating, colouring kicks so they're bigger, and creating these big kind of tunnel reverb warehouse kick drums, whatever you want to call them. I've seen them called a few different things. So my kick and the start of this patch is simply a 909 sample. Sounds pretty weedy in comparison. I'm compressing the kick, adding some sub, a little bit of clipping from this amplifier drive and some EQ. That's then going into the sidechain input on this Dynamics module. And the input is the kick through the reverb, which just sounds massive. And because it's been sidechained, I can turn this into my kind of bass sound as well. But seeing as we've got this sidechain happening, it's not going to get in the way of the kick drum because that's ducking the dynamics with that sidechain input. Throwing in some other sound and effects. So in this patch, we'll look at parallel, quote, New York style compression and sidechain filtering, which completely changes the way a compressor reacts and responds to your audio. Now we'll do so with this boom bap hip hop style beat and this crusty texture. But first, let's look at the beat. And if I blend over to how I've set the compression, way over the top. I do like it though, even though it's utterly ridiculous. But the low end's blooming with a slightly higher attack, compression up full. We're getting this nice slap and kind of spank from those transients. And the idea of parallel compression is simply to mix the affected compressed sound with the dry sound so you can compress harder for that sound and effect while bringing in some of the character and original transients and dynamics from your input. So simply blending some clean mix back in. We really do have the best of both, that spank and aggression of this heavy compression and the sound of my input beat. Now moving over to sidechain filtering, here's this kind of crusty texture in the right hand dynamics. And I have my drum beats, just a copy of that coming into the sidechain input, and that playing just as is, no filtering or anything happening to this drum beat. Here's the sound that we get. It's really aggressively being thrown around, and that actually works well for me. This chord tone and noise kind of sucking up between the beats. But it's maybe nice for an effect or part of a track. It's a bit too much overall. So what I'm going to do is filter my sidechain. And in that case, that means filtering this drum beat that's coming in to the sidechain. Now, so you can hear what that's doing, I've taken the beat and ran it through a low pass filter. Nothing special, but when I then sidechain with this, it's going to duck against my kick. And hopefully you can hear the difference. If I open the filter, every bit of that beat is chopping into these pads and textures. If I filter that beat, it's only really the kick that's making this duck. So when this plays against the drums, it just ducks against the kick. It's much more musical. So here we'll take a look at the difference between compression and expansion. Now, here's a drum break. This is bypassed currently. Heavy compression squashes those dynamics, pulls that background percussion up. And expansion pushes that background sounds down, kick and snare gets louder. And with compressors that just sound and pump like this, it'd be rude not to do some French paf dunk kind of thing. So here we're going to explore feedback with Dynamics. I'm splitting the output in a multiple, a copy going to record, a copy going to the input for the feedback path out back to in, and another copy coming to data so we can see it. Now, warning, watch your ears, watch your levels, it's going to get nasty. So there's tons of great feedback sounds, pulling them out, making samples, one-shots, single cycles or multiple cycles for wavetable type synthesis. There's just loads to go at. Explore feedback and definitely explore it with Dynamics. So here I'm using the expander to chop into and carve up beats, effectively losing their sustain and cutting some of these effects out of the sound. Now this is dry, Dynamics is bypassed. Short and punchy, chopped up. Just gives this thing a nice kind of groove and a nice tighter feel. The other thing that I'm doing is taking the envelope out and using this to control this basic synth line. The envelope from the drums, the envelope followed signal from the compression detection is controlling the filtering, and that gives this kind of play along, crude kind of one band vocoder thing. So even though I've been emphasizing these modules and compression in a modular system as a creative music making tool for a modular system, they're of course great studio tools and processors. So here's me playing some bass, and I'll let you hear that raw. And this is set kind of how I'd like it, taking out some of that mid honk, bit of extra bass, some subs, which there's masses of sub low end if we want it, and just a touch of compression. Now the compression we can really push. Really kind of spanky, slappy compression, where those transients are coming through thanks to the attack time. There's some nice drive as well if we push into it, push the amp drive up. It's got that kind of mildly overdriving channel strip on a nice vintage mixer kind of vibe. And the EQ, you kind of emphasise the string noise and the honk in the instrument. I'm wanting to tame that a bit here. And if we boost these subs, whoa, just monstrous amounts of sub bass energy if you want it. A little bit of it goes a long way. Now here we'll explore audio rate compression. And you may be thinking, audio rate compression, what the? But as this works like a VCA as we've seen earlier, this is really an extension of the character VCA patch in this video. And I'm going to use this as a kind of monster distortion audio rate shaper. Using the envelope in, and in this case because audio is bipolar, I can expand or compress. I'm going to use an audio rate signal to control the level of the input. Let's change this audio rate modulator to a higher pitch. And because we can distort the amplifier here and shape, this becomes a real beast for kind of audio rate AM synthesis, audio rate modulation or audio amplitude modulation. Playing around with the rate of modulation again. I can make this dynamic by patching my modulator into another external VCA and having that then modulate dynamics. So now this audio rate modulation source is being level modulated in a separate VCA, and that dynamic signal is what's coming into dynamics. If I do this and bypass, you can hear that's my modulation signal for the AM synthesis. I'll play around with tuning one last time. There's some really interesting wave shaping, from more subtle sounds to really aggressive driven ones. So here I'm using Dynamics as a character VCA, and one that's oozing character in this case. I'm taking this sound, which is an oscillator, into the Dannysound filter, demo on that linked in the description, straight into Dynamics. So as you can hear, the filter's not closing, it's very much a droning sound. And by using the envelope in, we can use this like a VCA. But we have to expand it. If this was coming in and we were trying to compress, it would be ducking according to the envelope coming in. If I expand, this works like a normal VCA, and the envelope I'm using is this looping VCA DSR, again from Dannysound. As this is dynamic, I'm modulating level and release, so we've quite a lively, interesting envelope. So put your envelope into envelope in, turn this fully to expand with the level down. Works like a VCA with drive, sub-harmonic generation and EQ. It's a really characterful VCA as the back end of a synth voice. So here I'm using two EQs from two Dynamics modules to create a stereo image. Now this scope is showing the stereo image. If I was to change this, you can see we're instantly creating a stereo image. It's certainly really obvious in headphones. So making these neutral again. The idea here is to create the stereo image by EQing them differently, rather than thinking of taking a mono sound and say panning it one way. We're like fanning out the frequencies, maybe it's brighter on one side, more low end energy in another. So let's try that. We'll brighten up this side. And you can hear all that noise from one of my delay effects there in the left. Add more low end energy. And it's subtle. If you grab some headphones, you can hear this nice stereo image emerge. If you only have one EQ module, I would simply take my dry sound and pan it one way, take the EQ and pan it the other, and balance the levels back out, therefore creating a stereo image from a non-EQ'd and an EQ'd signal, as opposed to two different EQs. This patch is about making room for big, spacious ambient effects. It's the same patch as the dynamic ducking delay, just a different example. The input sound goes to my mixer, it goes into some effects 100% wet. These effects are compressed, and in that compression, sidechain ducked against the dry sound to get that clarity in the dry sound, allowing us to add more of these effects in between the input notes. So here I'm using a pair of Dynamics modules as a compander, doing some audio companding, and an emphasis and de-emphasis circuit. Now the history of both of those I find quite fascinating, and there's an exclusive Patreon video going into the wider context of this patch and companding an audio emphasis and de-emphasis. But what's going on is I have a noisy input source, super noisy in fact, and an effects chain that's also really noisy. So by expanding this sample input, I'm pushing down that noise and lifting the vocal, emphasizing the high frequencies, then coming through my effects chain and coming back to this Dynamics module. I'm compressing kind of the dynamics of the voice back to where they were, pulling up the effects and the sounds I do want from the effects, and de-emphasizing to rebalance the sample, while also removing noise from my effects chain. Listen to the difference. It's effectively a denoiser and an effects fixer. So I can get better effects response by emphasizing audio on the way in and de-emphasizing on the way out, and build a noise reducer with the expander and the compression. So here we're looking at stereo sidechaining and using the envelope ins and outs to make sure we get a nice linked behaviour from a single envelope control. Now here's a stereo stem of synths. And of course, playing these against the beat, they're going to want sidechaining. Now to set this up in stereo, I have my left and right audio into the left and right dynamics, I have sidechain coming into the left hand dynamics, and I'm taking the envelope out, which is the envelope follower following the sidechain signal, or the input if you don't have one plugged in, and the envelope out controls the envelope in. And from one envelope, I can link those two compressors. I still have to set the rest of them the same, but it's easily done. So here's a little circuit hack that allows for dual level or two ways of controlling the level of your sound. And this came by accident from Dannysound, patching into the envelope out rather than the envelope in. So here's my dry sound. It's a sample, it's a vocal speech.
I send greetings on behalf of the people of our planet.
Now taking this off bypass, you'll hear this is compressed.
To be taught if we are fortunate.
So you can hear that's already now compressed quite heavily. And if I take this audio rate signal into envelope out, this kind of little circuit hack here,
and it is with humility and hope
I have my compression and my external control. Now I could lower this to LFO rates. We can hear that level coming up and down as well as being compressed. It's quite an interesting little circuit hack I just kind of wanted to throw in the video. Patch an external signal to envelope out. It's meant to be an output, use it like an input, and you get this dual level control, your compression or expansion and your external signal. So here I'm using Dynamics modules to add low-end pressure, aggression, kind of mastering if you like. I mean, it's kind of not, but kind of is, in that it's finishing off the sound of this and making it fit for purpose. The purpose here to create this kind of pressure cooker of low-end, emphasizing noise, and just creating this kind of head in a pressure cooker nastiness for your doom ambience. Now without these, and these are roughly the same peak levels in terms of the dry and the wet, here they are dry and bypassed. More kind of throaty mids in this weird FM thing I've got going on, barely any low end in comparison, and much more subdued noise. Now turn the exciters down and bring this back in. just intense and nasty, and that's exactly what I wanted for this doomy ambience. Can really emphasise this vinyl crackly noise. And in terms of taking something not that exciting, to be completely honest, just adding this pulsing masses of low end, it makes this seem more fit for purpose for a nice doomy ambience for, say, a video game. So that's it for this video on Dynamics from Dannysound. I hope you found it useful and you've gleaned some creative and musical tips and tricks for your own modular music making. There's multiple Patreon exclusives from this video to come, which you can find linked in the description. All sorts of other stuff down there. Feel free to leave a comment and ask questions. And I'll see you in the next one. Cheers!